Please comment where you are watching in the world. After about a year of using Hinge, I had pretty much exhausted the dating pool in my city. I'm not saying I was wildly successful, far from it, but I'd swiped through most of the women who fit my narrow preferences. I wasn't into party girls or corporate types or the ones who posted nothing but group photos with dogs and vague captions. I liked women with edges, women who had stories. So I'd check the app once in a while, mostly out of habit. And one night, there she was. Her profile name was Coraline. That wasn't her real name, obviously. I'm changing it for privacy, but it fit her. There was something otherworldly about her look. She had these dusky, expressive eyes and a smirk that made you wonder if she was about to kiss you or wreck your life. Her hair was shoulder length, dip-dyed ocean blue at the ends, and her cheekbones could have been carved by gods. One of her prompts said, "I was raised by a woman who reads tarot and a man who coaches high school wrestling. Do with that what you will." I was hooked, but one line gave me pause. "You should know, I was in a car accident. I have some neurological disabilities and scarring as a result." It was honest, raw, and it forced me to confront my own hesitation. I'd be lying if I said I didn't sit with that for a moment. Why was I hesitating? She was stunning, active, based on her hiking and climbing photos, obviously sharp and witty, and brave, more than I probably understood. Passing on her just because she'd been through hell and come out scarred would have made me a complete jerk. So I sent a message, something dumb like, "I've never been jealous of a climbing harness until now." To my surprise, she replied the next day. We started talking about books, travel, and the kind of poetry that gets stuck in your bones. She used the word petrichor in a sentence, that earthy smell when rain hits dry ground, and I melted. We swapped numbers. Text turned into voice notes. I loved her voice, low, lilting, almost musical. I found myself checking my phone constantly, just to see if she'd messaged. When we finally planned our first date, coffee and donuts on a rainy afternoon, I was more nervous than I'd been in years. She showed up in a black windbreaker, her hair damp from the misty weather, and when she smiled at me, I felt something shift in my chest. We talked for hours. She was funny, thoughtful, and completely disarming. I never even brought up the accident. I figured she'd mention it when she was ready. Halfway through our second coffee, she said, "I have a policy. Fail fast. If someone can't handle my damage, there's no point wasting time." Then she pulled her sleeves up and showed me the scars, faint lines across her shoulder, and a jagged one along her hairline. She tried to sound casual, but I could see the tension in her jaw. She told me she couldn't lift her left arm above shoulder height anymore. But the worst part, she said, was the night terrors. "They're not constant," she explained, "but they're intense. Sometimes I wake up screaming. It's like reliving the crash. I've only recently started dating again, but I'm always terrified I'll freak someone out." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "You don't freak me out," I said. And I meant it. We took it slow, really slow. I didn't want her to feel rushed or pressured. We had sleepovers without sex. We watched old movies. We kissed, slow, exploratory kisses that made time feel thick and syrupy. I wanted her. God, I wanted her. But I wanted her to feel safe even more. About 2 months in, after dinner and wine and watching a terrible indie horror film, she leaned into me on the couch and whispered, "I want to stay the night, and not just sleep." Her fingers found the back of my neck, and I swear I nearly short-circuited. We made our way to my bedroom, and I don't want to go into graphic detail, but it was intimate, emotional. Her skin was soft, even where the scars ran deep. She trembled when I kissed her shoulder, and she whispered my name like a secret. Afterward, we lay tangled together for what felt like forever. I kissed her temple and told her she was beautiful. She laughed softly and pressed her body tighter against mine. That night, I thought, might be the start of something real. But around 3 a.m., I woke up. My bed was empty. My heart sank. I figured she'd gone to the bathroom. But the ensuite door was open, and the light was off. I checked the floor. Her clothes were gone. Then I heard it, the rattle of the front door. My apartment's old, and unless you lock the door from the inside, it never stays fully shut. I crept out of bed, my body still sore and warm from the night's intimacy. I rounded the corner of the hallway and saw her, Coraline, standing by the door, a corkscrew clutched in her fist. She was breathing hard, her eyes wild. "Who are you?" she shouted. "Why is the door locked? Let me out before I call the cops." I froze. Her voice was sharp, panicked. She didn't recognize me. She was having a night terror. A full-blown dissociative episode. "Coraline," I said gently, It's me. You're safe. You're in my apartment. We had dinner. I hesitated, not sure if bringing up the intimacy would help or make it worse. You're safe. I promise. But she didn't hear me. Or she didn't believe me. She lunged, not wildly but with terrifying precision. The corkscrew pressed against my neck, not hard, but close enough to feel the cold metal on my skin. I need the key, I said softly, keeping my voice even. It's by the door, in the little wooden clock. Remember? She blinked. Her hand trembled. And then something changed in her eyes. Recognition. Horror. She dropped the corkscrew like it had burned her. I'm sorry, she gasped, backing away. I didn't know. I didn't mean. She collapsed into sobs, her body shaking. I wrapped her in my arms and held her until the sun came up. She didn't sleep again that night. Neither did I. We talked. She told me that was her biggest fear, losing herself, hurting someone she cared about. That's why she hadn't dated in so long. Why she waited 2 months before trusting me. And now that fear had come true. She stayed until afternoon. I made her tea. We sat on the couch in silence. I wanted to tell her I wasn't scared off, that I still wanted her, but I could feel her pulling away. A week later, she broke it off. I thought I was ready, she told me. But I'm not. That night, I can't stop replaying it. I'm so sorry. I told her I forgave her, that I understood. And I did. But it broke me a little. I still think about her. Sometimes when I'm lying awake, staring at the ceiling, I wonder if she ever thinks about me. If she remembers the way I whispered her name. The way I held her after she almost hurt me. I'll never forget the way she looked in my bed. Scarred. Vulnerable. Beautiful. And I hope, wherever she is, she's healing. She deserves that. 2 summers ago, I downloaded the dating app Hinge. I'd heard from a couple of friends, LGBTQ+ folks like myself, that it was one of the better platforms for finding meaningful connections. Being a woman who dates only women, I figured I had nothing to lose. I'd already tried the usual suspects, Tinder, Bumble, even her, and had gotten nowhere. So one particularly hot June evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, lit a candle, and made my profile. To my surprise, it wasn't the exhausting experience I'd grown used to. The prompts made it easier to understand someone's personality before even matching. I hate to sound like I'm doing a paid promo, but Hinge really did feel a little more human. I wasn't just swiping on abs or mirror selfies. I was reading answers to what's your love language or what's your irrational fear and getting genuine glimpses into people. I was flicking through profiles, sipping wine, and sending the occasional message when I came across a girl named Linnea. Linnea looked like she'd been cultivated in a lab specifically to ruin me. Cropped silver-dyed hair, a jawline that could cut glass, a sleeve of tattoos that peeked through every photo. But it wasn't just the aesthetics. She had the softest, most heartbreakingly innocent smile on her face, piercing green eyes. And then I saw her job title, motorcycle mechanic. That was it. I was done. There were photos of her working on old Harley engines in coveralls, grease on her cheek, sleeves rolled up. I could practically smell the oil and metal. Without hesitation, I double-tapped her photo and typed out a message. This is possibly the hottest thing I've ever seen. Also, do you give motorcycle lessons? Asking for a friend me. I expected silence or, at best, a delayed reply. Maybe a polite LOL. But not 20 minutes later, Hinge buzzed. Linnea has invited you to start the conversation. My heart skipped. I actually said, no way, out loud to my empty apartment. I was skeptical. She was too perfect. She looked like someone who didn't even need to be on dating apps. But I replied anyway, and to my surprise, she was amazing. Not just flirtatious, not just witty, she was sharp. Introspective. She told me she was into literature and old horror films. We debated about music genres and swapped Spotify playlists. She was funny, dry, sarcastic humor that landed every time. We didn't always agree, but she was never combative. Just open. It was intoxicating. We moved from Hinge to Telegram within a week. And about 2 weeks in, we decided to meet in person for coffee. Public place. Daytime. I felt it was the responsible lesbian thing to do. The night before our date, she sent me a selfie of her outfit, a red flannel with the sleeves rolled up, black jeans, Doc Martens. Her tattoos were on full display. Her hair looked freshly styled. She looked ridiculous, ridiculously hot. I stared at that photo way too long. And not just stared. I imagined how that flannel would feel against my skin. what her tattoos might feel like under my fingertips. I had to literally force myself to put the phone down, close Telegram, and take a cold shower. I got ready the next morning like it was prom. I went through 3 outfit changes, 2 panic attacks, and 1 emergency eyeliner redo before I finally walked out the door feeling semi-human. The coffee shop was a cute little corner place surrounded by tall apartment buildings. I got there 10 minutes early, as any anxious queer would. I sat outside, pretending to be chill, sipping a latte, and checking my phone every 30 seconds. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I texted her. "Hey, just checking in, traffic okay?" No reply. That's when the nerves shifted from excited to uneasy. I'd been ghosted before. Who hasn't? But Linnea didn't strike me as that type. She always responded quickly. I waited another 10 minutes. Still nothing. I called her. It rang twice, then voicemail. I told myself she was probably stuck in traffic or something came up. But a knot was forming in my gut. A cold, tightening knot that told me something was off. Then finally my phone buzzed. A message from Linnea. But it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even in her usual tone. "Okay, I think this has gone on long enough. I have to be honest. I'm not a lesbian. I'm not even a girl. Sorry to catfish you. I just thought you were hot and wanted to check you out, in person." In person? The words didn't make sense at first. I read them again, and then the horror started to set in. In person. He was nearby, watching me. My head whipped around. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I scanned every face on the street. No one looked suspicious. No one was looking at me. But someone was. Somewhere. I spun in place, adrenaline buzzing through my limbs. Then, for some reason I still can't explain, I looked up. There, about 5 stories up, in one of the apartment buildings surrounding the coffee shop, was someone standing at an open window. A man. He was holding something. A phone, I think. Too far away to make out his face clearly, but close enough to see his posture, the way he leaned forward, watching. And then, he waved. A slow, deliberate, theatrical wave. I felt the blood drain from my face. My stomach turned. My knees actually buckled for a second, and I had to hold on to the cafe railing to steady myself. The fear wasn't like anything I'd ever known. It was primal. I was being watched. Stalked. Toyed with. I turned and walked away as fast as I could without full-on sprinting. Back at my apartment, I collapsed on my bed and cried into my pillow like a child. Loud, ugly sobs that I couldn't stop. I was humiliated. Violated. Afraid. And worse? I'd wanted her. I'd wanted Linnea. I'd fantasized about her touching me. About us tangled in sheets. About her lips on my neck, her fingers tracing the ink on my skin. I'd imagined her hand slipping under my shirt while I pulled her flannel off her shoulders. And none of it had been real. I felt sick. I reported the profile to Hinge. I deleted our Telegram thread. But I couldn't delete the way it made me feel. Like a fool. Like bait. I didn't touch a dating app for almost 2 years after that. It started like most stories do these days, with a swipe. His name was Nico. His profile made him look clean-cut, with a touch of quirkiness. We messaged for a few days, over the weekend. I offered to meet for a coffee. The first half of the date was uneventful. We met at a busy cafe in an artsy part of the city. It was early spring, still chilly enough to justify a scarf but warm enough to sit outside. He arrived 5 minutes early, waved me over with a crooked smile, and complimented my boots. He was a little taller than I expected, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, lean, with that slightly disheveled academic vibe. We ordered drinks and talked about mundane things. Favorite childhood cartoons, weird food pairings, whether or not ghosts were real. He made a few jokes that landed, and I found myself relaxing. I wasn't swooning, but I wasn't bored either. It was fine. As the hour passed, he suggested we check out another cafe nearby that had better pastries and less pretentious baristas. I hesitated for a moment. Something about the switch felt unnecessary, but I shrugged it off. "Sure," I said. "Lead the way." The walk was only about 10 minutes. We chatted the whole way. Then, as we passed a row of old brownstones, he paused. "Shoot," he said, patting his jeans. "I think I left my wallet in my apartment." I gave a polite smile. "No worries. Want me to wait out here?" He looked a little sheepish. "You can come in if you want. I just don't want to keep you standing in the cold if I end up tearing the place apart looking for it." I hesitated again. But he'd been decent so far. We were in a well-populated area. I had my phone. I even texted my best friend a quick update. Going into his place for a sec. Just grabbing his wallet. All seems good. She replied instantly. Location? I dropped a pin and added, if I'm not out in 20 minutes, call the cops. I laughed as I sent it, thinking I was being cautious to the point of paranoia. He unlocked the door and led me up 2 flights of stairs. His apartment was cozy, cluttered but not messy. The kind of place you'd expect from a guy who reads Murakami and owns plants he forgets to water. Make yourself comfortable, he said as he disappeared into another room. I sat on the edge of the couch, crossing my legs and glancing around. There were books stacked on every surface. A record player on a low table. A mug with World's Okayest Chef, written in fading Sharpie. He came back a minute later, holding a wallet. Found it, he said, triumphant. Then he just sat down next to me. Close. Too close. So, he murmured, turning toward me. You're even cuter in person. I gave a polite smile, unsure how to respond. Before I could say anything, he leaned in and tried to kiss me. It wasn't aggressive, exactly. But it wasn't smooth either. His hand brushed my cheek, then slid down to my neck. I pulled back slightly, laughing to diffuse the tension. Whoa, I said softly. We barely finished coffee. He chuckled, but didn't back off. You're right. I'm just messing around. He tried again, slower this time, like he was trying to be seductive. But it fell off. Calculated. I stood up. We should probably get to that other cafe before it closes. He didn't argue. Just sat back and said, Fair. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag and walked to the door. He followed me down the stairs, hands in pockets, quiet. I could feel his eyes on my back the whole way. When we reached the street, I smiled politely and said, Thanks for the coffee. I think I'm gonna head home. You sure? He asked, voice low. I was really enjoying our time. Yeah, I said. Me too. But I've got an early morning. He didn't push. Just nodded. I walked away, not looking back. That night, he texted me a few times, apologies, something about being overexcited, and a promise that he wasn't trying to be creepy. I didn't answer. I didn't block him either, for some reason. But I never replied. Weeks passed. Then months. I went on a few more dates, some good, some forgettable. Nico became a faded memory. A weird, slightly uncomfortable blip in my dating history. Then almost a year later, I saw his face again in the news. It was one of those local crime blurbs that barely gets noticed. A headline that read, Man arrested after woman allegedly held against her will in Brooklyn apartment. I clicked the article without thinking. My stomach turned. It was him. Nico, or Nicolaus Emmerich, as the article revealed. 31. Charged with unlawful confinement, aggravated assault, and attempted sexual battery. Apparently, a woman had gone on a date with him. He'd invited her up to his apartment under some excuse. I don't know if it was the wallet again. And when she tried to leave, he locked the door. Wouldn't let her go. When she fought back, he struck her across the face and tried to force himself on her. She managed to get to a window and scream for help. A neighbor heard. Called 911. The police broke in and arrested him. The article mentioned that he was facing multiple charges and that other women had come forward with similar stories. He was looking at serious time, though if convicted, he could be out in 6 years with parole. 6 years. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling cold all over. I thought about how close I'd come to being that woman. How easily I could have been the one trapped in that apartment. How different things might have gone if I hadn't pulled away when I did. He had seemed so normal. That was the part that haunted me most. I'd told myself he was just a little awkward. Just eager. Maybe rusty at dating. I'd brushed off the red flags because they weren't glaring. But predators don't always come snarling. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they wear ironic mugs and talk about jazz. I didn't tell anyone at first. I felt ashamed. Like I'd almost been fooled. Like I should have seen it coming. But trauma doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it just whispers. Eventually, I told a few friends. My best friend was horrified. She kept saying, I'm so glad you texted me that night. I'm so glad you got out. So am I. Now, anytime I go on a date, I tell someone exactly where I'm going. I drop a pin. I have a code word. I always meet in public. I never go to their place, not on the first date. Maybe not even the second. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I got out before things went too far. But that night taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the scariest people are the ones who seem the safest. I matched with her on Hinge one late Friday night, somewhere between the second glass of wine and the inevitable scroll of regret. Her name was Liz, or at least that's what she went by. Short for Lysandra, she explained later. She had those intense, angular features that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a punk zine from the early 2000s. Buzzed sides, glitter-dusted eyeliner, piercings in places I didn't even know you could pierce. Her profile was a mix of chaos and charisma. One of her prompts read, "You'll know I like you if I give you a new piercing." I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. We hit it off fast. Our first chat was about nose rings. I told her I'd thought about getting one, but chickened out because, well, I'm a wimp. She sent back a laughing emoji and said, "We should go on a piercing date. I'll hold your hand. Or your face." It was bold but flirtatious. I liked that. There was something about her energy, unpredictable, yes, but magnetic. She had that wild girl confidence that made you feel like you were tiptoeing on the edge of something thrilling and reckless. I joked back, "We should probably wait until at least the third date before we start piercing each other." Her reply was instant. Challenge accepted. The banter was hot in its own strange, chaotic way. Over the next couple of days, we kept talking. Mostly flirting, sometimes deep dives into music and body art. She had a thing for industrial metal and poetry written in blood. I wasn't sure if that last part was metaphorical or literal. I didn't ask. Eventually, we made plans to meet. Casual. Beer and wings at a dive bar she liked. I figured, worst case, I'd get a decent IPA and maybe a weird story. She showed up in black skinny jeans, tattered boots, and a sleeveless denim vest covered in patches, buttons, and, I kid you not, safety pins stabbed through the collar like teeth. Her lip ring caught the light when she smiled, and I noticed a small, fresh-looking piercing on her upper ear that hadn't been in her profile pics. "You did that yourself?" I asked, gesturing to the ear. "Last week," she said, grinning. "Got bored. You ready for yours?" I laughed. Nervously. The date started off fun. She was intense, but not in a bad way. We talked about body mods, travel, urban legends, and the ethics of piercing animals. We both agreed it was weird. She made me laugh, and I felt strangely comfortable around her, like I'd known her longer than a few chats. Then, after our second beer, she leaned in with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I brought you something," she said. I blinked. "A gift?" "Sort of." She stood up and motioned for us to head outside. I thought maybe she'd brought me something cool, a pin, a patch, something artsy. But no. As soon as we stepped outside, she reached up to her collar, popped off one of the safety pins, and said, "See? Doesn't hurt at all." And then, I swear to God, she drove the safety pin through both of her nostrils. I froze. Blood immediately started to trickle down her upper lip. She grinned at me, eyes wide. "Now you have no excuse," she said, holding out the bloodied pin in my direction. "Come on. I'll do one of yours." For a second, I thought she was still joking. She wasn't. "No, Liz, I'm good," I said, backing up half a step. "Really?" She took another step forward. "Don't be a baby," she said. "It's barely anything. Look." She reached toward my face, and I instinctively grabbed her wrist. "Stop," I said more firmly. "I'm not doing this." That's when things shifted. Her playful smile twisted into something colder. Her cheeks were streaked with blood, and her fingers still held the pin like a weapon. We must have looked insane. Two girls in the middle of the sidewalk, one bleeding and holding a sharp object, the other visibly trying to keep her at arm's length. People started watching. A couple walking by slowed down. A man across the street paused, probably trying to figure out if he was witnessing a fight or performance art. One woman even stepped forward and asked, "Hey, is everything okay?" Before I could answer, Liz shouted, "What's your problem?" Her voice cracked with something between frustration and embarrassment. I didn't get to reply, because suddenly the situation spiraled. From the outside, it must have looked like I'd hit her, or at least shoved her, because now a small group was forming, and the tone shifted from curiosity to tension. A guy in a hoodie stepped closer and said, "Yo, did you just hit her?" "No," I said quickly. She tried to. She was trying to pierce me with a pin. I told her no. But the blood on her face, the way she stood clutching her nose, made it look bad. Really bad. And the worst part, Liz didn't say a word. She didn't correct them. Didn't tell anyone I hadn't touched her. She just stood there, letting the narrative twist around me like a noose. "You hit her over a piercing?" another guy said, stepping forward. "No, I didn't hit anyone," I said louder, heart pounding. "She pierced herself. Look at the pin." She tried to do the same to me. The crowd didn't seem convinced. I realized then that if one of those guys decided to throw a punch, I was done. I was outnumbered, and the more I talked, the more defensive I sounded. And Liz, bloody, silent Liz, just stood there, letting it happen. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I shoved past the people forming a loose circle and bolted down the block. I didn't stop until I was halfway home, lungs burning, hands shaking. I never heard from her again. I reported her on Hinge. Deleted her number. Scrubbed all traces of her from my phone like she was a virus. But I couldn't scrub the feeling she left behind. That primal fear. The sense of being hunted not by a stranger, but by someone I'd willingly met. Someone I'd flirted with. Someone I'd almost let get close. And the worst part, before she pulled that safety pin from her collar, before the blood, the madness, the scene, I was kind of into her. I'd imagined kissing her, letting her straddle me on my couch, maybe whispering something filthy while tugging my hair. She had that dangerous NSFW vibe that felt like both a threat and a promise. But that fantasy died the moment she tried to force metal through my skin. So I get migraines. Not just the my head hurts kind, but the full-blown aura-having, vision-blurring, vomiting in public restroom kind. They're not frequent, but when they hit like a truck made of strobe lights and nausea. I'd been chatting with this guy from Hinge, let's call him Milo. He had this soft hipster look going on. Glasses. Flannel. Kind of like if Buddy Holly had a baby with a barista who writes poetry on napkins. He was charming over text, quick with banter, and clever in a way that made me think he was either a writer or someone who'd dated a lot of them. After about a week of messaging, we made plans to meet for dinner at a Thai place downtown. He picked it, said they had the best iced coffee and curry that makes you sweat just the right amount. I should have canceled. About an hour before I had to leave, I felt it, that creeping, ominous shimmer in the corners of my vision. My head didn't hurt yet, but I knew it was coming. The aura always came first. Like a cruel little warning that my evening was about to go straight into the toilet. Literally. I had a choice. Cancel and look flaky, or go and pray the caffeine hit fast enough to kill the migraine before it bloomed into a full-blown apocalypse inside my skull. I chose poorly. I rushed to get ready, half-dressed while chugging water and chewing on Advil like candy. I told myself that if I got to the restaurant early, I could slam a Thai iced coffee or two, and maybe, the caffeine would cut the migraine off at the knees. I got there 15 minutes early, ordered a coffee, drank it like it was the antidote to poison. It didn't work. By the time Milo walked in, I was already bracing my elbow on the table, pressing 2 fingers into my temple like I was trying to hold my brain together. I smiled when I saw him because, well, that's what you do, right? You don't want your date to know you're already halfway to the underworld. He smiled back, sat down, started talking, and I didn't. I couldn't. I nodded. I smiled. I made little noises. I think I said, yeah, maybe 3 times. That was the extent of my contribution to the conversation. I was concentrating so hard on staying upright and not vomiting that forming full sentences was like trying to run a marathon in a hurricane. He didn't seem to notice. He talked. And talked. About his job, his dog, a podcast he liked, a documentary about cave diving. I caught about 30% of it. The other 70% was a blur of nausea and static. Twice, I excused myself and went to the bathroom to throw up. Twice, I came back, wiped my mouth, sipped water, and pretended like nothing happened. I would love to say I'm an amazing actress, but I'm not. I think I was just so quiet and pale that he assumed I was nervous. Or shy. Or maybe just really into everything he was saying. We didn't have dessert. Thank God. Afterward, we walked outside, and he leaned in to kiss me. I panicked. Not because I didn't want to, I did not want to, but because I had literally just thrown up in the restaurant bathroom and still had the taste of pad thai and stomach acid in my mouth. I turned my head at the last second. The kiss landed somewhere on my cheekbone. Sorry, I mumbled. I'm just shy. He smiled like it was endearing. Like I was some delicate little flower he was going to patiently nurture until I bloomed. I got in my car, drove home, and collapsed in bed fully clothed. I spent the rest of the night alternating between vomiting and sleeping. The migraine finally broke around 3 a.m., leaving me with a pounding headache and that post-migraine haze that feels like someone scrubbing your brain with steel wool. I figured that was the end of it. A bad date I could laugh about later. A story I could tell while holding my head dramatically and saying, I was basically a corpse the whole time. But then Milo texted me the next morning. Had an amazing time last night. You're really something. I blinked at my phone. Was he joking? A few hours later. Hope your day's going well. I keep thinking about your smile. What smile? The one I forced through nausea while trying not to puke on the table? Then that evening. Would love to see you again. Maybe next week. I didn't respond right away. I felt bad, honestly. He seemed nice. But I couldn't wrap my head around it. I'd barely spoken. I'd vomited twice. I'd been about as responsive as a haunted doll. Over the next 3 weeks, he texted me every single day. Sometimes just a good morning smiley face. Sometimes paragraphs about his day. Sometimes links to songs he thought I'd like. I didn't block him. I wasn't scared, just confused. I figured he'd get bored eventually. But no. He was completely enamored with the version of me he met that night. The silent, nodding, barely conscious version. The version that didn't interrupt, didn't joke, didn't challenge him. The version that lay in wait beneath a migraine like a serpent under a heat lamp. And that's when it hit me. He didn't like me. He liked the idea of me. The quiet girl. The girl who listened. The girl who didn't say much. Who didn't take up space. That's not me. When I'm not being held hostage by a migraine, I'm loud. I'm opinionated. I cuss like a sailor. I talk fast and argue for fun. I'm sarcastic and weird and occasionally inappropriate. And he wasn't into that girl. He was into the ghost of me. The corpse. Eventually I replied. I was polite but honest. Hey, I really appreciate you reaching out. But I don't think we're a great fit. I wasn't feeling well during our dinner, and I don't think I was really myself. Wishing you all the best. He replied with a sad face and a short message. I thought we had something. We didn't. Or maybe we did, he just had it with someone who didn't exist. So this was a while back, maybe a year after I'd started using Hinge, and I was finally at that stage where getting ready for dates didn't feel like preparing for war. I'd had a few wins, a few losses, and a handful of weirdos, but nothing that made me seriously reconsider dating altogether. That changed after this one. His name was Renzo. Uncommon, sure, but it stood out to me. He had this quiet charm in his messages, said he liked old records, flea markets, and abandoned places. A little odd, but not in a red flag way. More like a let's go ghost hunting in an old hospital kind of way. We chatted for a few days, then swapped numbers. His texts were funny, a little chaotic, full of memes and random thoughts at 2 a.m., but I chalked that up to him being passionate or quirky. He'd mention his love for antiques, and I told him I was into older stuff too, vintage cameras, old books, that kind of thing. That's when he suggested we go to this massive antique warehouse he knew about. At first, I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. Low-pressure date, browsing old stuff, maybe grab coffee after. I didn't think much of it. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was not FaceTiming him before we met. He'd said in his profile that he was 6 feet 1 inch. I'm 5 feet 7 inches, so I figured, hey, tall guy. Cool. I show up to the antique warehouse, which, by the way, looks more like an abandoned furniture graveyard than a store, and this guy walks up to me saying my name. I'm looking around to see who said it, because the only person approaching me is like 5 feet 5 inches, maybe 5 feet 6 inches in boots. He barely reaches my shoulder. Renzo. I say. He grins. In the flesh. I blink. You said you were 6 feet 1 inch. He shrugs. Yeah. Round up a little. A little? He laughs like it's no big deal and starts guiding me toward the warehouse. I should have walked away right then. But I didn't. Part of me didn't want to look shallow. The other part was just stunned. Like maybe this was just going to be one of those awkward, forgettable dates. Not what it turned into. The moment we stepped inside, I knew something was off. The place was dim, barely lit by a few overhead fluorescents that flickered like they were planning to give up any second. Dust hung in the air in thick, visible clouds. The floorboards creaked with every step. And lining every shelf, every corner, every wall, dolls. Hundreds of them. Old porcelain dolls. Cloth dolls. Dolls with cracked faces and glass eyes that stared right into your soul. I felt like I was walking through a horror movie set. Cool, right? Renzo said, practically vibrating with excitement. Yeah, I lied. Super cool. We walked deeper into the warehouse, and that's when things started to unravel. First, the Tourette's. He hadn't mentioned it at all in his profile or chats. And it wasn't just mild. Every other sentence came with a sudden, loud, involuntary curse or twitch. I'm not judging. I've met people with the condition before, and I get it. But the lack of disclosure? That hit different. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to embarrass him or make him feel bad. But the environment, the dolls, the lighting, the echo of his voice bouncing off the tin roof, it all just felt wrong. And then came the touching. He kept grabbing my shoulder. Not in a casual, hey, look at this kind of way. More like gripping it, squeezing, like I was some kind of stress ball. Once or twice, he ran his hand down my back. The second time, his hand lingered. I pulled away. Please don't touch me like that, I said. He smiled like I'd just told him a joke. You're cute when you're nervous, he said. Come here. He grabbed my hand and started pulling me toward the back of the store. I resisted, but he kept walking, tugging me along like a kid dragging a balloon. We ended up in this weird little hallway made of tall, leaning bookshelves and cracked furniture. At the end, there was a single restroom, old, yellowed, with a flickering bulb above the door. I want to show you something, he said, and before I could say no, he yanked me inside. He closed the door behind us. Locked it. I froze. Renzo, what are you doing? He didn't answer. Just turned and pressed me against the wall. Not hard, but fast. My hands hit the grimy tile, and before I could react, he dropped to his knees, not in some romantic gesture, but like he was about to unzip his pants. And then he did. You're beautiful, he said, voice shaking. I've wanted this since I saw your profile. I pushed him back. Stop. He didn't. He reached for my face with one hand, the other holding himself. When he tried to force my jaw open with his fingers, something in me snapped. I bit him. Hard. He screamed, a high-pitched, furious sound, and stumbled back, clutching his hand. What's wrong with you? He shouted. Me. I yelled. What's wrong with you? I shoved past him, unlocked the door, and ran. I barely made it out of the hallway before I broke into a full sprint. Tears blurred my vision as I pushed through the rows of haunted dolls and peeling furniture. Just as I reached the entrance, a man, the shopkeeper, I assumed, stepped in front of me. Miss? Are you okay? Before I could answer, Renzo came barreling out behind me, still shouting. She bit me. That psycho bit me. The shopkeeper didn't even hesitate. He stepped between us and told Renzo to back off. When Renzo tried to argue, the guy pulled out a phone and said he was calling the cops. Renzo froze, then turned and bolted. The police came. I gave a statement. They found and arrested him 2 blocks away. Turns out I wasn't the first person he'd done this to. There were complaints, allegations, but no one had ever pressed charges. Until me. I never saw him again. Never wanted to. It took me months to go on another date. Even now, I flinch if someone grabs my shoulder unexpectedly. I can't walk past antique stores without that smell, that musty, dusty air, hitting me like a punch to the chest. I'm with someone now. Someone kind. Someone who respects space and silence and asks before touching me. He knows about what happened. He doesn't push. He listens. I matched with her on Hinge. Let's call her Marin. She was an art student, very into mixed media and performance-based stuff, and her profile was half selfies and half blurry shots of installations that didn't make much sense to me, but looked expensive. Our first date was fine. Not bad, but nothing that screamed sparks or soulmates. We got drinks. Talked about our favorite directors. She wore this oversized corduroy jacket and a lot of rings. I remember thinking she looked like she belonged in a black and white French film, which was cool, if a little intimidating. We hugged at the end and parted ways. I figured that was it. But then the next night, she texted me. Hey, random, but I'm at this bar in your neighborhood. Wanna come hang? It was late, I was 2 beers deep on my couch, and I figured why not? At worst, I'd get a few drinks. At best, well, I was hoping for the best. When I showed up, she was sitting at the bar with a whiskey in hand, hair tousled, eyes bright. She smiled when she saw me, a real one, not the polite kind from our first date, and I thought maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she just needed to warm up. We drank, talked, laughed a lot more than the first time. She was looser, funnier, and her flirtation had more bite than I remembered. She leaned in close when she talked, rested her hand on my arm when she made a joke, and at one point whispered, "You're way cuter than I gave you credit for." I blushed like a teenager. As the bar started winding down, she leaned close and said, "I think we should go back to your place." I didn't argue. The cab ride back was chaotic in the best way. She sang along to the radio, said something about how the moon was watching us, and laughed so hard at one of her own jokes that she snorted. I was eating it up. Then we pulled up to my apartment, and everything changed. She opened the cab door, stepped out, and immediately face-planted onto the sidewalk. At first I thought she was seriously hurt. She landed hard. But after a few seconds, she started giggling. "I'm okay," she slurred, waving me off as I helped her up. Gravity." I got her inside, sat her on my couch, and pressed a bag of frozen peas against the swelling on her forehead. She was still laughing, but her words were getting mushy. I poured her some water, tucked a blanket around her, and tried to gauge if this was drunk and silly, or drunk and about to crash. She insisted she just needed a nap. That she was fine. I walked her to my bed, tucked her in, left a trash can by the side just in case, and set up camp on the couch. I figured that was the end of the night. It wasn't. At some point, maybe an hour later, I heard a weird sound from the bedroom. A sort of moaning grunting hybrid. I sat up, heart pounding, and walked down the hallway. When I opened the bedroom door, I found her on the floor. She'd rolled off the bed, knocked over the trash can, and was lying half bent on her side, murmuring something about needing to pee. "Bathroom's this way," I said, gently helping her up. She tried to walk but stumbled, so I guided her the rest of the way, sat her on the toilet, and stepped out to give her privacy. I figured she'd be fine. I figured wrong. About 10 minutes later, I knocked. No response. I pushed the door open and instantly gagged. The smell hit me first, a sour, gut punch of a stench that clung to the walls like a curse. Then I saw her. She was passed out on the floor, pants around her ankles, head wedged between the toilet and the sink. And somehow, I still don't understand the physics of this, she had managed to defecate everywhere except inside the toilet. The floor. The wall. The side of the tub. It looked like a horror movie set designed by someone with a grudge against porcelain. I stood there in stunned silence, trying to figure out the next move. I didn't want to touch her, didn't want to invade her space, but also couldn't leave her like that. Eventually, I grabbed a towel, gently propped her head up, and cleaned the floor as best I could. I left water, tissues, and another towel next to her, then went back to the couch and tried to sleep. A few hours later, I heard movement. She got up, wandered to my bed, and collapsed onto it, still wearing the same clothes, now smeared with God knows what. I didn't stop her. I didn't have the energy. When I woke up the next morning, I checked on her. She was still asleep, snoring like a tractor. I wrote her a note, left $10, and set out a clean t-shirt and gym shorts in case she wanted to change. I even Googled a laundromat and left directions. I felt like I'd done a decent job of being a decent guy. That feeling didn't last long. That evening, I got a text. "I know what you did. I'm going to the police." I stared at it, confused. "Excuse me?" I replied. Her next message made my blood run cold. "You drugged me. I'm getting my hair tested. You're going to jail." My stomach dropped. I felt like I'd been punched through the chest. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Anything I said might be twisted, and there was nothing I could say that would make her believe me if her mind was already made up. The next few weeks were hell. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the night in my head, wondering what I missed, what I did wrong. I had no idea where this accusation had come from. Maybe her memory was fuzzy. Maybe she woke up covered in her own mess and needed someone to blame. But then I got a call. A detective, asking me to come in for a conversation. He even said the words, "Don't leave town." I felt like I was in a movie. A bad one. The kind where the innocent guy gets framed and everything spirals. They questioned me, took my statement, asked if I knew anyone who might have slipped something into her drink. I gave them everything, the bar, the name of the bartender, everything I could remember. And then months later, they found the real guy. Someone else at the bar. A man with a record. Caught on surveillance near our drinks while I was in the bathroom. They searched his apartment and found GHB, among other things. He confessed. Just like that, it was over. For them. But not for me. She never apologized. The police never said sorry. No one reimbursed me for the therapy or the stress or the insomnia or the fact that I started losing my hair. To them, it was just another case. To me, it was the worst night of my life. All because I said yes to a second date. Back in 2018, my life was an endless carousel of work and commitments. I was juggling 2 jobs, trying to finish my degree, and barely had time to eat, let alone date. It had been a while, maybe a year or 2, since I'd been in anything resembling a relationship. I wasn't lonely exactly, just curious. So late one night, half out of boredom and half from that creeping curiosity, I downloaded Tinder. I wasn't expecting much. I'd never been on dating apps before. Honestly, I didn't even plan to meet anyone. I thought I'd just swipe around, see what the fuss was about, maybe get a laugh or two. But then I matched with Seraphine. Seraphine had this light complexion, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes, and a smile that sat somewhere between angelic and dangerous. I messaged a simple, "Hey." To my surprise, she replied in less than an hour. Her replies were short, but playful. We exchanged Snapchats and phone numbers by midnight, trading a few pictures, just casual selfies. That's when it hit me, she really wasn't a catfish. Her voice, her smile, even the way she tilted her head, it was all consistent between the app and the Snap stories. We chatted into the early morning. She told me she lived in a town called Wallbridge, about 30 miles north of where I was. I didn't have anything planned for the next day, and neither did she. So, impulsively, we made plans to meet. Not at a restaurant, not for coffee, but at her place. She said she just wanted to chill. I know what you're thinking. I was thinking it too. Who meets someone for the first time at their house, past midnight? But the way she texted, the photos, even her voice messages, it all felt oddly inviting. And I won't lie, she was gorgeous. Seraphine had this sultry confidence that made you forget logic for a moment. So I said screw it. Round Pushpin Part 2, the detour. We agreed on 12:30 a.m. Around 10 p.m., I started the drive. It was about a 45-minute ride, and I figured I'd stop by a friend's house nearby to kill time. While I was at my boy Darren's place, she called. "Hey, can you come by a little later?" "Like midnight?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost sleepy. I told her no problem. I was already nearby, and I'd just hang out until then. I didn't tell Darren why I was really there. He just thought I was bored and needed to vibe for a while. At 11:45, I got back in my car, plugged in the address she'd sent earlier, and started driving. The GPS took me into a quiet, upscale-looking suburb. Big lawns, fancy mailboxes, rows of white brick homes with soft porch lights and winding driveways. This couldn't be right. I pulled up to the address she gave me, a house that looked like something out of a realtor's dream. I parked in the driveway and called her. "Hey, I'm here." "I don't see you," she replied. "Are you sure you followed the directions?" "Yeah, I'm literally at the address you sent." "Hold on," she said. "I'll send you my current location." A second later, I got a ping on iMessage. It was a new spot, about 15 minutes away. I found it strange that she hadn't just sent that address to begin with, but figured maybe she was staying with someone or had moved locations. Whatever. I wasn't about to argue. I started driving again. Round Pushpin Part 3, the cornfield. As I followed the new directions, the streetlights began to disappear. The roads narrowed. Asphalt turned to gravel. Then gravel turned into dirt. Trees thickened around me. Cornfields emerged on both sides, tall, dark, and silent. I slowed the car. My headlights were the only source of light, and they barely pierced the black ahead. My heart beat a little faster. I wasn't scared exactly. I'm a big guy, been lifting for years, and I don't get spooked easy. But something about the isolation made my skin crawl. Still, I kept going. Eventually I saw it, a lone house at the end of the path. It looked like it had been built 100 years ago and never touched since. Shingles missing, paint peeling, one dim yellow light above the door. No cars in the driveway. No music. No sign of life. I parked, took a deep breath, and called her again. "I'm here." "Okay," she said. "I'll be right out." Round Pushpin Part 4, the figure. I leaned against my car, eyes fixed on the house. The front door creaked open, and someone stepped out. It was Seraphine, or I thought it was. But she wasn't dressed like before. She wore a long black dress that hit the ground, and a veil covered her face. Her hands held what looked like a handmade doll, little and twisted, like something from a horror film. Around her neck were beads or charms, strung together like some kind of ritual accessory. Voodoo maybe? I froze. I waited for the prank reveal, the hidden cameras, the laugh, the gotcha. But nothing happened. She just stood there. Then, from the shadows of the house, another figure emerged. Same outfit, same veil. But this one didn't walk. He ran. Straight toward me. In his hand was a machete. Round Pushpin Part 5, Escape. I didn't think. I just moved. I dove into my car, slammed the door, and floored it in reverse, nearly crashing into a tree as I spun the car around. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just drove. As I sped down the dirt path, I heard a loud pop, the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. I ducked instinctively, swerving as I tried to stay on the road. The cornfields blurred past me. My phone buzzed in the console, Seraphine's number. I didn't answer. Another call. Different number. Blocked it. Another. Blocked again. I drove until I saw lights. Civilization. I didn't go home. I went straight to Darren's place, woke him up, and told him everything. He wanted to go back and check it out with some of our boys, but I couldn't. I was shaking, my shirt soaked with sweat. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to forget. Round Pushpin Part 6, The Aftermath. We called the cops the next morning. I gave them everything, the messages, the address, the pictures. They went to investigate. The house was abandoned. They told me it had been vacant for years, no utilities running, no recent renters or owners. The report was filed, but there wasn't much they could do. No suspects. No license plate. No real name. I deleted Tinder that same day. Maybe it works for some people. Maybe you can find love or a hookup or a distraction in all that swiping. But for me, that night changed everything. I was lucky. I could have ended up missing. Or worse. If you ever meet someone online, and I mean ever, don't go to their house. Don't meet in the middle of nowhere. Don't ignore the red flags just because someone is attractive or charming, or because you're bored. Because sometimes it's not a date. It's a trap. Today unsettled me in a way I haven't felt in years. I've been going over it in my head all evening, trying to piece it together, trying to make sense of what happened. It's left this strange, heavy feeling in my chest, like I missed something important, or narrowly avoided something worse than I can comprehend. It started out as an ordinary afternoon. My 5-year-old son, Oren, and my 3-month-old daughter, Lyra, were buckled in the back seat as we drove to the park to meet my friend Callista and her daughter, Neva. Another mom we knew, Myra, was already there with her 2 girls. It's a decent-sized playground, the kind tucked behind a school, with the usual swings and slides, a large grassy field, and a wide parking lot. A line of trees borders one side of the park, beyond which is a half-developed construction zone that's been sitting dormant for months. The whole area is pretty rural, long, winding roads, wide open spaces between buildings, and this eerie stillness that you get used to if you live around it long enough. The kids ran off to play while we moms settled onto the benches, chatting and trading stories while taking turns holding little Lyra. Everything felt normal, cheerful, even. The sun was out, and the breeze was carrying the scent of cut grass. It wasn't crowded, just our group and a man with 2 kids, a little girl and a boy around 10 or 11. At the time, I assumed they were all together. Eventually, our kids began to drift across the playground, each finding their own fun. Oren made his way to the seesaws, which are set away from the main area, tucked under some trees, just beside the open grassy stretch that leads to the forest edge. I noticed he was sitting alone, bouncing slightly on one end, looking around for someone to play with. I was about to get up and join him when the older boy, the one I thought belonged to the other dad, walked over. He didn't look at Oren. He looked at me. "Do you want me to play with him?" he asked. His voice was flat. No inflection, no smile. Just a blank expression and a question that felt rehearsed. I hesitated, but only for a second. "Sure, bud. That'd be nice." He climbed onto the opposite end of the seesaw. Oren started chatting right away, being his usual bubbly, curious self. But the boy didn't say anything. He just went up and down, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the trees. I watched them for a moment longer, then returned to the bench. I figured maybe he was shy or just quiet around adults. After a while, I heard the boy talking. His voice was low, and I couldn't make out the words, but it seemed like he was finally responding to Oren. I let myself relax a little. At least they were playing. That's when the man, the one I assumed was his father, walked by us toward the parking lot. I smiled and said casually, "Hey, that was really sweet of your son to play with mine." He looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. "He's not mine," he said. "I don't know who that kid is." My stomach sank. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded. "Yeah, he came up to me earlier asking if I had a daughter named Neva. Then he kind of just followed us around until you guys showed up." I whipped my head toward the seesaws. They were empty. I shot up from the bench, nearly dropping my phone. I handed Lyra to Callista without a word and took off running, calling out Oren's name. My eyes scanned the playground, nothing. My voice cracked as I shouted again. I was sprinting now, and then I saw them. Far out, near the edge of the trees, Oren and the boy were walking side by side. They were almost to the tree line. I screamed his name again, louder this time. Oren turned. He looked confused, and then started to walk toward me. That's when the boy grabbed his arm. He tried to pull Oren toward the trees. Oren shouted, "Let go of me." He started wriggling and pushing. The boy held on. Then Oren, bless his stubborn, fiery little heart, began to fight back. He punched, kicked, even headbutted the boy. Oren's always had a hard time being touched when he wasn't expecting it. He has ADHD and gets easily overwhelmed. Normally, his volatility is a challenge. But today it saved him. The boy finally let go. I reached them a few seconds later, scooping Oren into my arms. He was crying, red-faced and trembling. The boy had already turned and run into the trees. I didn't chase him. I just held my son and backed away. The others were now approaching from the playground. They hadn't seen what happened, not really, just the tail end, just enough to know something had gone very wrong. Back on the bench, with Oren still clinging to me, I asked him, "What did he say to you? Why were you going with him?" He sniffled and looked at me, wide-eyed and confused. He said he knew Ryan. Ryan who? Ryan from Ryan's Toy Reviews. He said he was friends with him, and that Ryan had a trampoline and candy and slime, and he wanted me to come play. I felt a wave of nausea crawl up my spine. The boy had listened to Oren. He'd asked questions, found his interests, and used them. We didn't see him again that day. No one else at the park recognized him. No one knew where he came from or where he went. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That a strange boy tried to lure my son into the woods and then disappeared? Would that even register? That night, I locked every window, every door. I didn't sleep. Oren had nightmares and curled up beside me. Lyra stirred often, sensing the tension in the room. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, heart still racing, mind still trying to rationalize what had happened. When my boyfriend Corwin and I moved into his dad's studio apartment, we knew it was temporary. We had just come back from our stay in England, trying to re-establish ourselves, get jobs, and eventually find a place of our own. The apartment itself was small but modern, tucked on the third floor of a decent building on the edge of a well-off neighborhood. His dad had recently renovated it and was planning to rent it out eventually, so we were staying there on borrowed time. There was one feature we loved, the rooftop deck. It wasn't huge, but it opened right off the kitchen and overlooked the back of the building. It was peaceful up there. You could see the tops of trees, hear the city hum in the background. On a clear night, we'd sit out with a drink or a smoke, talk about the life we were trying to build. But there was something we hadn't anticipated. Something, or rather someone, that turned our stay into a slow-burning nightmare. The first time we noticed him, he was just a voice. We were sitting on the deck one Saturday night, talking in normal tones, not playing music or being rowdy. Out of the silence, we heard a gruff, angry shout. "Will you both shut up and get back inside?" We paused, startled, and scanned the area. Then we spotted him, an older man, maybe in his mid-60s, leaning out of his window just across the alley. He was heavy-set, sweat-stained, his face twisted in this expression that was more than just annoyance. It was venom. Corwin, always the diplomatic one, called back, "Hey man, you could have just asked nicely." That triggered a tirade of insults, profanities, accusations. He barked at us like we were criminals. We shut the door and went back inside, half laughing, half worried. A few days later, Corwin's dad called. The neighbor had reported us, said we'd been throwing parties, playing loud music, disturbing the peace. Claimed he had to call the police. None of it was true. In fact, the night he was supposedly harassed by our party, we'd been out of town. It didn't stop there. Every time we stepped onto the deck, he'd find something to complain about. The sound of our chairs, the water pressure from the hose, the way our clothes hung on the line. One morning, we were eating breakfast outside, just toast and coffee, and he started screaming that the clinking of our cutlery was unbearable. It was absurd, but it started to wear us down. We began limiting our time out there, whispering instead of talking. We were tiptoeing in our own space. Then came the day that changed everything. We were on the couch, just relaxing. The curtains were mostly drawn, but they were sheer, enough to let in light. We weren't doing anything scandalous, just kissing, tangled up a little, enjoying a quiet moment. Corwin paused, suddenly stiffening. "What's wrong?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just got up, crossed the room, and looked out the window toward the neighbor's apartment. I followed him with my eyes, confused. Then he muttered, "He's filming us." I sat up. "What?" "There's a red light, blinking, through the blinds. He's got a camera pointed right at our window." I stood there frozen. "Are you sure?" "I swear to you." We argued about it for hours, Not with each other, but with ourselves. Was it paranoia? Was it something else? But Corwin was convinced, and the longer I thought about it, the more it made sense. His hostility, his obsession with our deck, his need to control what we did, even inside our own home. Corwin started watching back. At night, he'd go outside and try to see through the neighbor's window. He never got a clear view, but he was sure he saw a tripod once. Another time, the glint of glass. Then one day, the neighbor left his window open. Corwin couldn't help himself. He climbed onto the deck railing, then onto the garden table, and peered inside. I wasn't with him, he told me later, his voice low and shaken. There were tapes. Dozens of them. Stacked against the wall. Labeled with dates. Some had names. And at the foot of the bed, heavy-duty camera equipment. Real stuff. Not just a phone. We called the police. They listened politely. But without actual footage, without a confession or a witness, there wasn't much they could do. They warned us not to trespass again. Said they'd have a word with him, but wouldn't be able to get a warrant without more. Things went quiet after that. Too quiet. He stopped yelling. Stopped accusing. But we knew he hadn't stopped watching. Then one night, there was a knock at the door. It was Tova, our neighbor on the other side. She was older, a bit eccentric. She asked us how things were going with the man across the alley. We exchanged a look. We told her everything. She listened carefully, then said, "I've seen the same thing. Blinking lights. Long lenses. You're not crazy." She offered to give a statement. That was the break we needed. With her testimony, the police returned. They got a warrant. One afternoon, they showed up at his apartment with a letter and 2 officers. We watched from the kitchen window as they entered the building. An hour later, he was escorted out in handcuffs. We didn't cheer. We didn't celebrate. We just stood there in silence. They told us later that he'd been filming us for months. Eating, sleeping, changing, kissing, laughing. We were his show. He got a few months in jail. Not nearly enough, in my opinion. We moved out soon after. Found a place with no direct sight lines, no rooftop decks, no paranoid windows. I was 11 when it happened. That strange mix of freedom and fearlessness that comes with being a preteen was in full swing. My days were packed with school and homework, and weekends were my only chance to breathe. So when my friend Sidra invited me over for a sleepover one Friday night, I was excited. Her house was a 2-story bungalow on a quiet street, surrounded by half-finished construction and flickering street lamps that barely did their job. That's important, the part about the lights. They'd go out all the time, especially when the power flickered, which it often did in that area. Sidra's parents were heading out that night to some formal dinner, the kind of thing adults say they can't get out of. They trusted us to be alone for about 6 or 7 hours. For us, that was a dream come true, a whole evening of cartoons, junk food, and maybe even some late-night pranks on each other. I remember her parents giving us the usual emergency contact, rundown, and reminding us to bring Shaggy, their 4-year-old Labrador, inside before the storm hit. His outdoor kennel had some busted panels and would leak badly in the rain. It was already drizzling when they pulled out of the driveway. We stayed inside at first, watched some cartoons, played cards, and cracked jokes about our teachers and classmates. Around 9:30, Sidra looked out the window and said, "You know that empty plot down the road? The one with the fence? Let's check it out." I didn't answer right away. I'd seen that lot before, overgrown, surrounded by a crumbling 2-meter wall. No construction equipment left there, no workers. Just weeds, scattered rubble, and a thick silence. It gave me the creeps. But Sidra was persistent, and I didn't want to seem like a coward. So we got Shaggy inside the house, clipped him to his chain so he could roam the first floor, grabbed the spare house keys, and headed out into the night. I remember the air being heavy, like the rain was holding its breath. We walked in silence, our shoes crunching against the gravel as we reached the broken part of the wall. It had enough cracks and footholds for us to climb over. Once inside, we dared each other to spread out, to sit alone, several meters apart, and see who would cave first. It was Sidra's idea, of course. I walked backward until she was just a silhouette in the dim light. We sat in silence for what must have been 10 minutes, maybe more. I was about to call out to her when I saw her stand, quickly, too fast, and start walking toward me. She wasn't running, but her pace was frantic. She was jumping over rocks, pushing through weeds, even getting scratched by thorny vines along the way. Her face was pale under the moonlight. I was about to tease her for being scared when she grabbed my arm and whispered, We need to go. Now. I just remembered, I forgot to feed Shaggy. It didn't make sense. Her parents had filled his bowls before they left, and he had an automatic water feeder. But something about her expression shut me up. We climbed over the wall again, faster this time, and the moment her feet hit the ground, she gripped my wrist and started sprinting down the street. I could barely keep up. We reached her house, breathless. She ordered me to unlock the front door while she locked the metal gate from the inside, bolting it into the concrete, then latching the 2 doors shut with thick chains. She didn't say anything until we were inside and had locked every window, every door, and drawn every curtain. Shaggy followed her around, tail stiff, ears alert. Finally, she turned to me and said, "There was someone there." I stared at her. "When we were sitting apart," she continued, "I looked past you. There was someone crouching in the bushes. At first I thought I imagined it, but then they moved. Closer to you. They didn't see me watching. I didn't know what to say. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for too long. We hugged for a moment, both of us trying to pretend we weren't terrified. We agreed not to tell our parents. They'd warned us not to leave the house, and we didn't want to lose our rare night of freedom. We peeked out the window. The street looked empty. No shadows. No movement. Slowly, the adrenaline faded, and we tried to distract ourselves. We turned on cartoons again, tried to laugh, tried to act normal. But it wasn't over. An hour later, we were upstairs in her bedroom. Sidra was showing me her new computer game, and we were both starting to relax, until Shaggy started barking downstairs. Not his playful bark, this was a deep, guttural growl. Aggressive. We froze. Sidra went downstairs to get him. When she returned, she looked shaken. "He was standing by the front door," she said, growling at it. I had to tug him hard to get him away. We stepped out onto her balcony to get a view of the front yard. The lights were off. We'd turned them off earlier to keep things cozy, but the moon gave us just enough visibility. And then we saw it. There was a person in her yard, standing in front of the door, perfectly still. He was wearing heavy, mud-stained clothes. His hair was matted and wild. He didn't move, just stood there, facing the house. We ducked back into the room, drawing the curtains shut. Shaggy whimpered beside us. Then we heard it, the rattle of the front door handle. Someone was trying to open it. We crept down the stairs, staying low. The noise moved. The person was now trying the window next to the door. Sidra's eyes widened in panic. "The back door," she whispered. "The attached space door. I forgot to lock it." That door led into a small storage area attached to the house, with a flimsy wooden door leading into the kitchen. It only had a basic deadbolt. If he got into that space, he could break through easily. She told me to wait by the inner door with Shaggy. "If I'm caught," she said, "let the dog out. Lock this door. Don't open it." I wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. She ran downstairs, out the side door, and into the yard. I heard the metal latch click, then the sound of her rushing back toward me. We shut the inner door, just as something slammed against the outer one. He'd found it. We held the kitchen door shut, breathless, waiting for the next move. But after a few minutes, the noise stopped. We crept back upstairs and waited. Sidra peeked through the blinds. "He's still out there," she whispered. "But now he's looking up at us." I joined her at the window. There he was, standing in the yard, head tilted back, eyes aimed at our balcony. But the room was dark. The curtains were drawn. There's no way he could see us. Then he started laughing. Not a joyful laugh. A slow, broken giggle that echoed in the silence. And then he dropped to all fours. He began crawling around the lawn. Fast. Animal-like. Still laughing. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. This went on for nearly half an hour. Then he stood, turned toward the street, climbed onto the dog's empty kennel, pulled himself up onto the wall, and jumped down. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed in Sidra's room with the lights off, curled up on the bed, every creak of the house making us jump. Her parents came home around 2 a.m. and found us still awake. They asked why all the locks were bolted and the windows closed on such a nice night. We told them we just wanted to play in the dark, and we never spoke of it again. I've never shared this story publicly before. It spans over a year of my life, and though so much time has passed, I still feel a chill crawl up my spine when I think about it. It started when I was 14. Back then, MSN Messenger was the thing, where you made friends, flirted, shared music, and sometimes let strangers into your world without realizing the danger. My cousin Alira had just gotten a new computer, and in her excitement, She added dozens of random people to her contact list. One of them was a boy who called himself Mark Halloran. He said he was 15, from Blackpool, England. They started talking daily. He wasn't like the other boys from school. He complimented her, sent her songs with sweet lyrics, asked her questions about her dreams. The kind of attention any teenage girl would have melted for. After a few weeks, he admitted he was actually 16. Alira was hesitant, but he apologized and she forgave him. He knew her birthday was coming up and asked if he could send her something. We were curious how serious he was, and if he was really who he claimed to be. So Alira gave him her mailing address. A few days later, a box arrived. Inside was a DVD player, a huge teddy bear, a stack of CDs, clothes, sweets, and a handwritten note. Alira told her parents she'd won a school raffle. Meanwhile, Mark kept messaging her, always with the same charm, always with the same too-good-to-be-true devotion. Over the next few months, more packages came. He said he played for an under-21 football team and made decent money. It was a fantasy, a teenage dream. Eventually, he asked to meet in person. Alira agreed. But the night before he was supposed to arrive, he confessed something else. He wasn't 16. He was 21. Still, she went. I called her that night, but she didn't say much. Just that she didn't want to talk to him anymore. She sounded shaken, not angry, just quiet, withdrawn. A few days later, I got a friend request from Mark. I accepted it, mostly out of curiosity. He asked me why Alira had stopped talking to him. I didn't know what to say. I told him maybe she'd just moved on. But then we started talking, every day. He was funny, clever, charming. He made me feel interesting. Like I was mature. Important. I told Alira, and she begged me not to talk to him. She wouldn't explain why. She just said, "Please, don't." That night, I told him what she said. He offered to call me, said he could explain everything. When I answered, I was surprised. His voice was high-pitched, almost squeaky. He told me he'd been in an accident as a child, and it had affected his voice. I felt bad for judging. Then he sent me a package. It was massive, filled with band t-shirts, an iPod, books, candy, new Converse shoes, and more money than I'd ever seen. I was overwhelmed. It felt like something out of a movie. We kept talking. Weeks passed. Then he asked to meet. I told my best friend, Neris, and she was skeptical. She insisted on coming with me. We set the meeting point near my house, a public spot just in case. He was late. Then, out of nowhere, a blue Volkswagen Golf pulled up and screeched to a stop. What stepped out of that car was not a 21-year-old. He was short, maybe 5 feet tall, dressed head to toe in denim. His skin looked strange, like it had been badly scarred. His eyes were sunken, his hair greasy. He looked to be in his 50s, maybe even older. He smiled and said hello, but neither of us responded. He asked if we wanted to go for a walk. We nodded, trying not to show our panic. As we walked, Neris and I whispered a plan. We told him we needed to stop by a friend's house to grab a DVD before heading to mine. We led him to a house on my street, a friend of my older brother. We rang the bell, and the moment the door opened, we ran inside. He stayed on the pavement, confused. We told the friend everything. He bolted the door and helped us climb over the back fence. We sprinted through gardens, across narrow alleys, and into the woods that backed onto my actual street. We stayed hidden for over an hour. When we finally got home, my hands were still shaking. I called Alira, and she came over. We didn't sleep that night. We couldn't. A few days passed. Then the text started. From Mark. Then photos. One showed his wrist, cut and bleeding. Another was a message saying we'd destroyed him, that we'd ruined his life. We blocked every number, deleted every account. Then one day Alira got a call. It was him. Our uncle was at her house that night and grabbed the phone, listening in. Mark said he'd left a gift outside her house. A car. He described it in detail, the color, the ribbon on the steering wheel, the key under the tire, the documents in the back seat. The police were called. They traced the registration. The car was registered to a Pamela Halloran, supposedly Mark's sister. But Mark had told us before that his sister had died in an IRA bombing decades ago. Another lie. We never got a last name. Never found out who he really was. He knew our addresses, our voices, our faces. He knew where we lived, what we liked, what we feared. He vanished after that. But sometimes I still check the windows at night. Still flinch when I get a message from an unknown number. Dating apps and I have had a rocky relationship. I don't think I'm alone in saying that. You download one, swipe a bunch, maybe match with a few people, and then watch the conversations fizzle out faster than a damp firecracker. But Bumble felt slightly different. It had this premise where women made the first move, which I thought might cut through some of the awkwardness. Still, I wasn't expecting much when I matched with a woman named Maria. She was from Wales, with a name I'd never heard before and a smile that looked like it could stop traffic. Her profile wasn't flashy, just a few natural photos and a short bio about her love for old movies and Turkish coffee. I was intrigued, and more importantly, she messaged first. That alone made her stand out in a sea of match silence. We talked for a couple of days. It wasn't just casual banter either. We dove into real topics: books, strange dreams, favorite smells. Hers was freshly baked bread, mine was eucalyptus, and even childhood superstitions. Texting her felt like writing letters to someone I'd known for years. So when she suggested we meet in person, I was all in. We chose a little cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist, one of those spots that always smells like roasted beans and cinnamon. I got there first, heart thumping like an over-caffeinated drummer. When Maria arrived, she was wearing a navy coat with silver buttons and a red beret that somehow didn't look ridiculous on her. The second she sat down and smiled, all the nerves melted away. We didn't drink alcohol that night. She didn't for religious reasons, and I was avoiding it because I'm a bit of a fitness nut. Instead, she ordered a couple of elaborate mocktails while I stuck to coffee. Too much coffee, to be honest. I had 3 cups in the span of an hour and a half. The barista must have thought I was writing a thesis or running a stakeout. Eventually, the coffee caught up with me, and I had to visit the restroom. Then again, and again. Every half an hour, I'd excuse myself with a sheepish grin, and every time I came back, Maria would be there, teasing me gently about my espresso-fueled bladder. It could have been embarrassing, but she made it feel lighthearted, like an inside joke we'd share later. But then I came back from one of my many trips and saw something that made my stomach sink. There was a man sitting in my seat. At first, I thought maybe she knew him. She was smiling, but it wasn't the same smile she gave me. It was the kind of smile you put on when you're nervous, but trying to be polite. I walked up behind the guy and, in what I thought was a light-hearted way, placed a hand on his shoulder and said something like, "Hey mate, I think you're in my seat." He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he turned slowly and gave me a look that could have frozen lava. Maria's eyes widened, and she gave me a quick, pleading glance. That's when I realized this wasn't a friend. Apparently, while I was gone, this stranger had walked up and started a conversation. According to Maria, he'd been watching us from another table and took the opportunity to swoop in the second I disappeared for my usual restroom sprint. She said his approach was aggressive, bordering on invasive, and she was just trying to defuse the situation without causing a scene. I asked him politely to give us some space. He stared at me like I'd just insulted his ancestors, but eventually he got up and walked off, not without trying to stare me down. I'm taller than average and keep myself in decent shape, so I wasn't intimidated, but the whole interaction left me with a strange, lingering discomfort. We tried to shake it off. We laughed about it, calling him the chair thief, and joking about how badly I needed to lay off the caffeine. But as we continued our conversation, Maria kept glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't see anything from my seat, but she could. And what she saw was the man, still there, still watching. He didn't leave. Even after the awkward scene and the obvious tension, he stayed seated a few tables away, sipping what I assumed was his 3rd or 4th glass of wine. Maria tried to ignore him, but it was clear she was unsettled. When the cafe finally started winding down, I offered to walk her home, and she agreed. As we exited, I glanced behind us. He was paying his bill. You can probably guess what happened next. We headed through the quieter streets of the city, and I kept looking over my shoulder. Sure enough, he was there, keeping a distance but never more than a block behind us. He wasn't yelling or running or doing anything overtly threatening, but his presence was enough to make the hair on my neck stand up. We approached her apartment building, and I asked if she was okay going in while he could still see her. She hesitated, then invited me in for tea. I didn't read too far into it. It felt more like a safety measure than a romantic invite, and I wasn't about to argue. Inside, her place was cozy and warm. She brewed some ginger tea, and we sat on her sofa, trying to convince ourselves that the guy had gotten bored and walked off. We even peeked out her bathroom window to check the street below. It was empty. Relieved, we sat for a while longer, talked, laughed, and even shared a quiet kiss. Eventually, I thanked her for the evening and started the walk back to my own place with that light, buzzy feeling that follows a truly good night. Then I looked over my shoulder. There was a figure behind me, about 50 yards back. His posture, his gait, it all looked far too familiar. I stopped and called out, "You've got to be kidding me." The figure stopped too. I told him to keep his distance. I wasn't going to shout or make a scene, but I made it clear that following someone home was not okay. He didn't respond, just kept his distance. But he kept walking. I took a longer route home, trying to lose him, but he was persistent. My apartment was in a converted Edwardian house, just 2 units, mine upstairs and another in the basement. If he saw me go in, there'd be no guessing which flat I lived in. That wasn't a chance I could take. So I turned around. I walked straight toward him, not running, not yelling, just walking with purpose. When I got close, I told him to back off, that this was getting out of hand, that if he didn't stop, I'd call the police. He said nothing, just looked at me. Then finally, he turned around and walked away. I waited for a full minute, heart pounding, before continuing on. I checked behind me once more. He was gone. Problem solved, right? I crossed through a small park that separated my street from the next, just a few minutes from home. I let myself relax, thinking the night was over. That's when everything went sideways. A flash of motion. A sharp pain in the back of my head. My legs buckled, and the world tilted like a broken carousel. I don't remember falling, just the sudden cold of the pavement. When I opened my eyes, my ears were ringing, and the back of my head throbbed like a drum. I thought maybe I'd been mugged. I tried to speak, to say, "Take my wallet," but the words were thick and slow. Then I heard a voice. "You still think you're tough now?" It was him. He didn't take my wallet. He didn't take my phone. He just stood there, watching me struggle to sit up. And then he hit me again. The next few minutes are a blur of pain and confusion. I remember trying to get up, feeling something warm trickling down my neck. I remember the sound of footsteps, his retreating. And I remember the thought that kept repeating in my head, this could have ended differently. Eventually, I managed to call emergency services. My phone screen was cracked, but it still worked. I sat on a park bench, shivering, blood on my collar, until the ambulance arrived. The doctors said I was lucky. No skull fracture, no permanent damage, just a mild concussion and a few chipped teeth. It could have been much worse. Later, the police caught him. Security cameras had picked him up following us from the cafe, then trailing me through the park. He got 6 years for assault and causing bodily harm. 6 years. It took me longer than that to feel safe walking home at night again. Maria and I dated for a few months afterward. She was wonderful, kind, intelligent, genuine. But she had to move for work, and we eventually lost touch. Still, I'll always be grateful for the time we shared. I'm not proud of it, but I've always had a soft spot for the mysterious type. The kind of guy who looks like he's got a story behind every tattoo and a past filled with shadows. So when I came across Cashin on Bumble, I was immediately hooked. He had this look, sharp jawline, eyes that could read you like poetry, and a body that looked like it had been sculpted out of adrenaline and bad decisions. His profile was minimal. A few moody black and white photos and a one-line bio. Ask me anything, but don't expect straight answers. I rolled my eyes at the cliché, but I swiped right anyway. To my surprise, we matched. Cashin messaged me almost immediately. That was a first. Most guys on Bumble wait, or worse, never reply. But not him. He was charming, effortlessly engaging, and asked real questions about my hobbies, my background, my music taste. Most guys lead with small talk, or worse, unsolicited photos. Cashin? He made me feel like the most fascinating person in the world. We messaged for about a week. The chemistry was undeniable. We joked, flirted, even shared a few late-night confessions. He told me he'd done some time in county jail, 18 months, to be exact. Wrong place, wrong time, he said. Some guy got stabbed and I got caught in the middle of it. Now, a lot of people would have hit the block button right there. And maybe I should have. But instead, I found myself thinking about how flawed the justice system is, how people get caught up in things that aren't always their fault. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that someone who carried so much pain in his voice could still be good. So when he asked to meet, I said yes. We met at an open-air bar downtown. It was one of those places with string lights overhead and live music playing softly in the background. Cashin looked even better in person, tall, confident, and yes, every bit the tattooed heartbreaker I'd imagined. But he didn't act like one. He was polite, paid for everything, made sure I was comfortable. He made me laugh. And even better, he listened. Most guys spend the whole date talking about themselves. Cashin wanted to talk about me. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, and my weekend guitar gigs. When I told him I played classical guitar with a flamenco influence, his eyes lit up. "That's beautiful," he said. "Your passion is captivating." It was the kind of compliment that didn't feel rehearsed. It felt genuine. I melted. We spent hours talking. He walked me to my Uber like a gentleman. We stood there in the soft glow of the streetlight, just smiling at each other. I was debating whether or not to kiss him when he said something that made my stomach drop. "If I wanted you to always remember me," he said, completely serious, "I'd break your ring fingers. That way, every time you played guitar, you'd think of me." He smiled after he said it, like it was a joke. But I didn't laugh. I just stared at him, trying to figure out if he really meant it. He chuckled awkwardly and added, "I'm kidding. Obviously." But I'd heard that tone before, from an ex who once told me I had the thighs of a linebacker, and then tried to pass it off as humor when I got upset. It's the kind of comment that's meant to hurt, but wrapped in just enough sarcasm to make you question your reaction. I didn't call him out on it right then. I just smiled politely, gave him a quick hug, and got in the car. He texted me that night, and the next day. I responded, but I never really engaged. Something about his comment kept looping in my head. I told a few of my closest friends about it. They were horrified. They called it a red flag. A major one. But I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe he really was joking. Maybe he just had a weird sense of humor. Then I saw a post in a local Facebook group for women in my city. It's a private group where we warn each other about creepy experiences, bad dates, street harassment, that kind of thing. The post had started gaining traction. A screenshot of a Tinder profile and a long caption underneath. The man in the photo, Cashin. The woman who posted it said that she'd gone on a date with him. He'd been charming. Smooth. She'd also mentioned how he seemed a little too intense, but had tried to brush it off. Then, when she refused to go back to his place, he got angry. Really angry. He grabbed her wrist, said something threatening, and when she called him out on it, he slapped her. She'd reported it. The police got involved. He was rearrested for violating probation. Only the reason he was on probation wasn't what he told me. It wasn't just a bar fight where someone got stabbed. He'd been convicted of indecent assault. Reading that post, I felt like I'd swallowed ice. That night, I went through our messages again, trying to spot the signs I'd missed, or worse, ignored. I realized I'd fallen for a filtered version of someone who wasn't just edgy or damaged. He was dangerous. The next day, I blocked his number, deleted his messages, removed him from every app. For a while, I felt guilty about ghosting him. But after reading that post, I realized I hadn't ghosted him. I'd protected myself. Sometime later, I learned that the Facebook group had worked with local authorities to press charges. Cashin was back in jail. This time for longer. I think back on that one sentence often, the one about the ring fingers. It's become a kind of metaphor for recognizing warning signs. They don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper. Sometimes they're wrapped in compliments. But they're there. And if someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time. I've always considered myself a pretty average guy when it comes to relationships. I've had a few serious ones, a few casual ones, and a whole lot of awkward first dates that never led to anything. Like most people navigating the dating app landscape, I bounced between Tinder, Hinge, and Bumble, hoping to stumble across someone who didn't make me want to delete the app after 3 messages. Eventually, I matched with someone who really caught my eye. Her name was Saria. She wasn't like the others. Her profile had personality, no duck-face selfies or quotes from the office. Instead, it showcased her artwork, a few candid photos, and a line that read, "I like stories that don't have happy endings." Edgy? Sure. But intriguing. We started chatting, and I was pleasantly surprised by how quickly the conversation moved past surface-level stuff. She was sharp, creative, and had this quiet confidence that made her incredibly magnetic. We talked about movies, books, music, and eventually her passion for anime. Now, I wasn't an anime guy. I hadn't seen anything beyond a few episodes of Dragon Ball Z in high school. But she was really into it. Especially the art. She talked about how expressive it could be, how it pushed creative boundaries. I listened, genuinely interested, not just in the subject, but in the way she lit up when she talked about it. After a few dates, which were all surprisingly normal and sweet, she invited me to her apartment. We had dinner, watched a documentary, and ended up cuddling on the couch. Things got a little steamy, but before it went too far, she pulled back, smiling but serious. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into her bedroom and came back a few minutes later with her laptop. "I want to show you something," she said. I thought maybe she was showing me her digital artwork. She'd mentioned she did some freelance illustration, and I expected to see a portfolio. Instead, she opened a folder filled with anime-style images. They were suggestive but not obscene. Stylized drawings of women in elaborate costumes, some in feline-like poses, others with fantasy elements, horns, wings, that kind of thing. It was bold, detailed, and honestly kind of impressive, but definitely sensual. She looked at me, trying to read my reaction. "You're the first person I've shown this to," she said. "It's something I've wanted to explore more, but it takes the right kind of person." I nodded. It was different, sure, but not alarming. I'd never been with someone with a kink for illustrated aesthetics, but hey, no judgment. We talked a bit more, then she invited me to sleep over, not for anything physical, just to stay. I agreed. I was comfortable with her, and maybe even a little fascinated. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with that all-too-familiar discomfort, the kind that only a cold apartment and slightly too much wine can bring. I tiptoed out to the living room to grab a glass of water and noticed her laptop still sitting on the coffee table, half closed. I shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity has a way of overriding better judgment. I tapped the spacebar. The screen lit up, still on the folder she had shown me earlier. I scrolled a little, just to revisit what we'd been looking at. But then I noticed another folder tucked inside that one. The name was just a string of symbols and punctuation, no preview image, no clear label. I hesitated. There was a part of me that said it wasn't my place, that I should close the laptop and go back to bed. But there was another part, a darker, more intrusive whisper, that wanted to know what was hidden. I double-clicked. At first, it looked like more of the same, anime-style images. But the tone was different, darker. The first image I saw was of a girl in a vulnerable position, her expression vacant. It wasn't overtly graphic, but it was disturbing. The next image was even worse, similar themes but with violent overtones that made my stomach turn. I clicked through a few more, hoping it was just one odd subfolder. But the deeper I went, the more twisted it became. The art was still stylized, but the themes were increasingly aggressive, even morbid. One image showed a character with lifeless eyes, surrounded by symbols I couldn't understand. Another looked like a before and after sketch, something terrible implied between the two slides. I closed the folder and sat back, shaken. I wanted to believe it was just fantasy, that it was no different than someone watching a horror movie or reading a dark novel. But there was something unsettling about how much of it she had saved. Dozens of folders, hundreds of files, all organized. And then I saw a folder labeled simply, Recordings. I don't know why I clicked. I didn't want to see more. But something compelled me. Inside were several video files, short clips, all named with random numbers. The thumbnails were black screens with red timestamps, like security footage. I clicked the first one. It started with darkness, then faint movement, a red light blinking in the corner. I couldn't make out much, just shadowy shapes and muffled audio. It didn't look animated. It looked real. I stopped the video. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to keep going. I didn't want to know more. I closed the folder, shut the laptop, and sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screen. Eventually, I returned to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, she made breakfast like nothing had happened. She was cheerful, asking how I slept, offering me coffee. I played along, trying to act natural. But my mind was racing. There was a heaviness in the room that she didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, and just ignored it. I left shortly after, making some excuse about a work call. She kissed me goodbye and said she hoped to see me again soon. I never went back. I blocked her number a few hours later. Deleted her contact. Removed her from Bumble. I didn't confront her. Maybe I should have, but I couldn't bring myself to. I kept thinking, what if I misunderstood? What if it was just art? Just a strange, niche interest? Then I'd remember the folder labeled Recordings. My name is Emma Calloway, and I work up north in Canada as an independent internet researcher. It's not thrilling work, mostly analyzing online retail trends so companies can fine-tune their algorithms. But over the last year, my attention has turned to something more disturbing, catfishing. For those unfamiliar, catfishing is when someone creates a fake identity online to deceive others, often for romantic scams. The dating app one consult for has seen a drop in users, largely due to fears of being catfished. To combat this, I've been creating a guide based on real stories from people who've experienced it firsthand. One of the most unsettling cases came from a young woman in the US. I'll call her Lena. She met a man online who seemed perfect. They messaged constantly, built a relationship, and after nearly a year, she went to visit him. She met his parents, stayed at his apartment, and hung out with his friends. Everything felt real. Then, without warning, he vanished. Lena spent hundreds on a private investigator. Months later, she learned the man had used a false identity and had done the same to multiple women. But the twist? He had been arrested for manslaughter. Another woman he'd been involved with had died during a risky sexual encounter, and he was convicted in federal court. Lena cried during our interview, saying they had talked about trying similar things. "That could have been me," she whispered. Another story came from a young woman named Tasha, an aspiring model. She was approached by someone claiming to be a professional named Jasmine, offering industry advice. Jasmine became a mentor of sorts, and eventually invited her to a lingerie shoot for a Milan-based company. When Jasmine didn't show, Tasha went ahead anyway. The photographer was polite, and she was paid well, so she returned for more shoots. But during the final session, the theme fell off, too provocative with childlike clothing. A year and a half later, she found out the photographer had been arrested for trafficking explicit images. He had posed as Jasmine to lure women into shoots. Though Tasha's photos weren't illegal, they were sold under false pretenses to disturbing buyers. She was devastated. The last story came from a woman who claimed she had once been the catfisher. At 15, she pretended to be someone else and began a relationship with a European boy. When things escalated and he planned to visit her, she panicked and told him she was in a car crash and had lost her legs and memory. Later, she found a Belgian news article about a man who'd taken his own life after a breakup with an online girlfriend. She believed it was him, but offered no proof. These aren't just cautionary tales. They're reminders that deception online can have tragic consequences. Don't trust blindly. Stay alert. And protect yourself. I've always found tattoos attractive. There's something unapologetic about them, like a person carving their story into their skin. So when I matched with a guy named Corvin on Bumble, and every picture showed a different piece of beautifully detailed ink, I was intrigued. His tattoos weren't the typical kind either. No tribal bands or motivational quotes. They were intricate, mythical creatures, ancient symbols, even what looked like poetry scrawled along his ribs. I thought it was artistic, mysterious even. His profile said he was a tattoo artist, and his opening line was, "If you were a symbol, what would you look like on skin?" Cheesy, sure. But it worked. We started chatting, and he was smooth, confident, but not arrogant. He made me laugh, asked real questions, and sent voice notes laced with this gravelly charm that made me want to hear more. After a few days, he invited me to check out the studio where he worked. Not for a tattoo, just to hang out after his shift. I hesitated, of course. Meeting someone for the first time at their workplace, after hours, wasn't exactly my idea of a safe first date. But he promised it was a shared space, and it turned out to be in a well-lit building just off a main street. Not sketchy at all. So I went. He met me outside with a crooked smile and a leather jacket worn in all the right places. Up close, his tattoos were even more stunning. He had them crawling up his neck, wrapping around his fingers, and peeking out from under his shirt collar. I noticed some lettering across his inner arm and asked what it said. He smiled. "Names." I laughed, assuming it was a joke. But he didn't laugh back. "They're people I've loved," he said. "Or at least thought I loved." My smile faltered. "All of them?" He nodded casually. "I believe in honoring the past." He led me inside before I could respond, showing me around the studio. The walls were covered in flash sheets and framed designs. The whole place smelled like antiseptic and clove cigarettes. It was oddly calming. We sat on the couch in the break room, sipping canned iced coffee and talking about tattoos, relationships, and our mutual love of weird documentaries. He flirted, but in a slow, deliberate way. Like he didn't need to rush because he already knew how the night would end. Eventually, things got a little more physical. Nothing graphic, just hands grazing knees, leaning closer when we laughed. I was into it. Then he rolled up his sleeve and showed me more of the names. They weren't grouped together. They were scattered, some small, some large, some hidden within other designs. One name was right above his heart. I asked how many there were. He shrugged. "Maybe 11? I've lost count." That's when something shifted. I asked, "Do you cover them when the relationship ends?" He looked at me dead serious. "No, that's the point." I laughed again nervously. "But don't you ever regret it?" He tilted his head. "What's there to regret? They were mine once. They still are." That made me pause. "They still are," I repeated. "Sure," he said. "People leave. But memories don't. The ink makes it real. Keeps them close." It was getting harder to breathe. Something about the way he said it, the way he looked at those names, it wasn't nostalgic. It was possessive. I tried to steer the conversation back to something lighter, but he kept returning to the topic of permanence, of how tattoos were a way to keep people from truly leaving. He said things like, "The body forgets, but the skin remembers, and everyone I've loved lives on here." At one point, he asked what my middle name was. When I told him, he repeated it slowly, like he was already imagining it in ink. "You'd look good in cursive," he said. I froze. "Are you saying you'd tattoo my name?" He smiled. "If this goes somewhere, why not? First names are nothing. Not like full names. Or birth dates. Those are sacred." I stood up, suddenly overwhelmed. "I think I should go," I said. He stood too, but didn't move toward me. "I'm not trying to scare you. I just think people give up on things too easily. Ink makes you stay." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't want to find out. He didn't follow me as I left. Just watched me walk out the door, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes unreadable. That night, he texted me. "You're the first name I wanted to write before dating. That has to mean something." I didn't reply. The next day, "I keep thinking about how your name would look under my collarbone. Right where it's warm." I blocked him. But it didn't stop there. A few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. No words, just a picture. It was a close-up of skin. Inked. My name. Not my full name. Just the middle name I'd told him, written in a delicate script across what looked like the inside of a forearm. I stared at the screen, heart thudding. It could have been anyone. Could have been fake. But I knew it wasn't. I've always been cautious when it comes to dating apps. I don't post too many photos, I never share personal info too early, and I always meet in public places. Maybe it's the true crime podcasts. Maybe it's just common sense. Either way, I've learned to keep one foot on the ground when diving into the world of online dating. That said, I matched with a guy named Emmerich on Bumble during a week where I was feeling unusually optimistic. His profile was clean but creative. No gym mirror selfies, no fishing trophies, no overused sapiosexual nonsense. Just a couple of travel photos, a candid shot of him reading, and a bio that read, "I remember everything I read. Let's talk books, not games." I liked that. We started chatting, and I was surprised at how quickly the conversation flowed. He was genuinely interested in what I had to say, and his responses didn't feel copy-pasted. He quoted authors I loved, and even name-dropped a few obscure ones I hadn't expected him to know. There was something comforting about the way he wrote, thoughtful, measured, like every word had weight. After a few days, he asked me to grab coffee at a quiet little bookstore cafe not far from my place. I agreed. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a paperback in his hand and a single cup of black coffee. He stood up when he saw me, smiled, and introduced himself in a voice that was softer than I'd imagined. We ordered drinks and sat back down. The conversation was easy, even better in person. He had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He remembered everything I'd said in our chats, my favorite author, the band I'd been listening to lately, even the name of the bakery I'd mentioned in passing. At first, I thought it was sweet, thoughtful. But the more we talked, the more I started to notice how much he seemed to know. "You mentioned your sister plays piano," he said at one point. I frowned. "I don't remember telling you that." He smiled. "Oh, I think you mentioned it when we were talking about childhood hobbies." I let it go. Maybe I had. But then he brought up the name of my high school. Not just the city, the actual name. And not in a casual way either. He said something like, "I read your school had a really strong debate team back then." That was the moment my stomach dipped. I hadn't mentioned my high school. I know that for a fact. I'm careful with that kind of information. I didn't say anything right away. I just smiled and nodded. But a quiet alarm started ringing in the back of my head. I began scanning through every message we'd exchanged, trying to remember if I'd slipped up. Even if I had, how could he know that specific detail? "I tend to research the people I'm interested in," he said later, almost offhandedly, as if he were talking about Googling a recipe. I looked at him. What do you mean? Just a quick search. It's harmless. I like to know who I'm talking to. I tried to laugh it off. That's pretty thorough. It's not a bad thing, he said. It's not like I hacked your email or anything. Just public stuff. LinkedIn, maybe a college article, old blog posts. You've written some lovely things, by the way. My heart started thudding in my chest. Yes, I had written blog posts, but not under my full name and not in years. I hadn't linked them to any dating profile. They were buried, pages deep in search results, if they even still existed. I tried to steer the conversation in another direction. I talked about books, about the cafe, about anything that didn't involve him listing facts about my life. But he kept circling back. You used to have a dog named Nix, right? A border collie? I froze. That wasn't online. That wasn't in any profile. That was personal. How? How do you know that? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't answer right away. Just smiled. You mentioned growing up in Ashwood, and there was only one family with a dog named Nix in the local vet's newsletter from 2009. I figured it was you. I stared at him. I didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. That's not normal, I said finally. He tilted his head. Curiosity isn't a crime. No, I replied. But crossing boundaries is. That seemed to catch him off guard. For the first time, his calm expression flickered. I didn't mean to upset you, he said. I stood up. I think I'm going to head out. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched me leave. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions, unease, confusion, even a little guilt. Was I overreacting? Was he just socially awkward? Or was this something more? That night, I got a message from him. I'm sorry if I came on too strong. I just like knowing who I'm talking to. It helps me feel safe. I didn't respond. The next day, another message. I hope you're okay. I saw someone who looked like you on 3rd Avenue. You were smiling. That made me feel better. I hadn't posted my location. I hadn't told him where I'd be. But I had been on 3rd Avenue, getting lunch with a coworker. I'll be the first to admit that I've ignored red flags in the past. The guy who claimed to be an entrepreneur, but lived with his ex? Red flag. The one who said he wasn't a dog person? Major red flag. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for my date with Everett. We matched on Bumble late one night, while I was half watching a nature documentary, and half scrolling through profiles out of boredom. His pictures were clean and straightforward. No shirtless mirror selfies or fish photos, thank goodness. One was him reading a book in what looked like a quiet cafe. Another showed him hiking somewhere foggy and dramatic. His bio was short. I don't blink much. But I listen more than most. Weird? A little. But I figured it was a quirky sense of humor. He messaged me first, which I appreciated. His texts were thoughtful and refreshingly articulate. No hey, or WYD. He asked questions about my favorite authors and what kind of tea I liked. He even remembered things I'd said in earlier messages, which felt like a novelty in the world of online dating. We messaged for a few days before he suggested meeting in person. He chose a bookstore cafe in a quieter part of the city, public, cozy, and relatively safe. I agreed. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a book open in front of him. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, neatly dressed, with a calm presence. He stood to greet me, smiled, and pulled out a chair. So far, so good. The conversation was smooth. We talked about literature, childhood hobbies, strange food combinations we secretly loved. He was polite, attentive, and had this oddly serene way of speaking, like everything he said had been carefully thought out before leaving his lips. But there was one thing I couldn't stop noticing. He really didn't blink. I know it sounds strange, but once I caught on to it, I couldn't unsee it. He would hold eye contact for long stretches, so long that I started blinking more just to compensate. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just hyper-aware. But then I started keeping track. 10 minutes. No blink. 15. Still nothing. It was like his eyes were made of glass. I tried to ignore it. After all, everything else about him seemed normal. Maybe he just had some rare condition. Or maybe he trained himself to do it, like those actors who can cry on cue. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered, "This isn't normal." After an hour, I made an excuse to go to the restroom and get a moment to myself. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. Why was I so unnerved? He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't touched me, hadn't said anything inappropriate. but something about his energy felt off. When I came back to the table, he was exactly where I left him, hands folded, eyes focused on the doorway. I sat down and he smiled. "You blinked 32 times during our conversation," he said casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. "Excuse me?" I asked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "You blinked 32 times. I counted." He tilted his head slightly, still smiling. "It's not a bad thing. Just something I notice." I forced a laugh, trying to mask the alarm bells going off in my head. "That's a very specific thing to count." "I like patterns," he replied. "They help me understand people." I nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. I glanced at my phone, pretending to check a message. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just my friend needs help moving something," I lied. "I should probably head out." He didn't object, didn't try to convince me to stay. He just stood and nodded. "Of course. If you decide to see me again, I'd like that." I thanked him for the tea and left quickly, walking a few blocks before I finally looked over my shoulder. He wasn't following me. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, the stillness of his posture, the way he never once blinked. Most of all, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd counted mine. I didn't block him right away. I wanted to believe I was overreacting, that I'd just had a weird date with an eccentric guy. But then, the messages started. The first one came the next morning. "You blinked less in your photos. I think you were happier then." I didn't respond. A few hours later, "Don't worry. I'm not upset. I just thought we had a connection." Then, "I saw you on 9th Street yesterday. You blinked a lot more than usual." That one made my stomach drop. I hadn't posted anything about where I was. I hadn't mentioned it, but I had been on 9th Street, grabbing lunch with a friend. He must have seen me. I blocked his number. Then came an email from a different address. The subject line read, "Blink once if you remember me." I reported it, blocked again, then changed my privacy settings across every platform I could think of. I deleted Bumble. I even made a police report, just to be safe, though they couldn't do much since he hadn't technically made a threat. Weeks passed. No new messages. I started to relax. I've had my share of weird dating app experiences. A guy who brought his pet ferret to dinner. One who showed up in flip-flops to a fancy bar. Another who asked me if I'd ever considered a communal lifestyle on the first date. So when I matched with Orion on Bumble, I approached with the usual caution. But he was different, at least that's how it seemed. His profile was refreshingly normal. Thoughtful photos, a short but clever bio, and the kind of messages that didn't make me immediately cringe. He was charming, confident, and a little bold in a way that felt exciting. We started texting back and forth. His messages had this perfect rhythm, witty, flirtatious, but never over the line. He seemed to know just what to say and when to say it. We talked music, books, embarrassing childhood memories. And yes, things got a little steamy. He wasn't shy about expressing what he wanted, and honestly, I was into it. There was something magnetic about the way he wrote, like he was teasing at something just out of reach. It didn't feel forced. It felt intentional, like he was crafting a connection that was both emotional and physical. I was hooked. After a few days of texting, we agreed to meet. We settled on a little cafe downtown, quiet, warm, and just upscale enough to feel like a real date. I dressed with a touch of effort, but not too much, wanting to strike that tricky balance between casual and, "I might be your future girlfriend." When I walked in, he was already there. He stood up when he saw me, and I'll give him this, he was just as attractive in person. Tall, clean-cut, with a slightly nervous smile that made him look even more endearing. But something was off. He didn't talk like he texted. His words were slower, more hesitant. Where the Orion I'd been messaging had been confident and flirty, the one in front of me seemed unsure of himself. Shy, almost awkward. At first, I figured he was just nervous. First dates can do that to people. I gave him time to settle in. We ordered drinks and started chatting about safe, neutral topics, music, travel, pets. He loosened up a little, and I started to relax too. Then we started talking about past relationships. I decided to reference one of the more flirtatious things he'd said in our messages. Nothing super risque, just a cheeky callback. That's when he froze. His face went red like full-on cherry tomato. He stared at me, then looked down at his hands. "I have to admit something," he said, barely above a whisper. I blinked. "Okay." The person you were messaging on Bumble, that wasn't me. That was my mom. I laughed. I thought he was joking. I waited for the punchline. None came. He looked up at me, eyes wide, completely serious. I'm not great at talking to people. So she offered to help. She wrote the messages. All of them. I couldn't speak. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd just heard. I looked at him, trying to gauge whether this was some twisted test or a prank or, God help me, reality. It was reality. While I sat there, trying not to visibly panic, he kept talking. She's really good with words. She thought if we got to the date part, I could just take over. That I'd do better in person. I swallowed hard. Your mom wrote all the messages? He nodded. Even the flirty ones. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to teleport into a different universe where this wasn't happening. I mumbled something about needing to use the restroom and quickly walked away. But instead of turning left, I turned right, straight out the front door. I didn't look back. I walked for blocks without even realizing where I was going. I felt like I'd stepped out of my body, like the whole thing had been a hallucination. But it hadn't been. I went home and sat on my couch for a solid hour, just staring at the wall. Then I called my best friend and told her everything. She gasped, then shouted, "That's the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life." I couldn't disagree. The next day, I blocked Orion's number, unmatched him on Bumble, and deleted the app for good measure. But even weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I missed him, obviously, but because I needed to understand how something like that could happen. I kept picturing his mother, sitting at a laptop, typing messages to me, laughing at my jokes, complimenting my photos, sending flirty texts just vague enough to straddle the line, and then passing all that on to her son like a script. There was something deeply unsettling about the whole thing, not just for what it said about Orion's social skills, but about their relationship. The boundaries were non-existent. It reminded me of a conversation I'd had once with a therapist friend who said that emotional enmeshment, especially between a parent and child, can be harder to spot than abuse, but just as damaging. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now I understood it perfectly. What shakes me most is how close I came to something I didn't understand. If he hadn't confessed, I never would have known. I would have kept dating someone I thought I had chemistry with, someone I thought I could trust. But it wasn't him I was connecting with. It was his mother, behind the curtain, playing Cyrano. Since then, I've been more cautious. Not paranoid, but definitely more alert. I look for consistency between how someone texts and how they speak. I ask more questions. I trust my gut. And I haven't been on Bumble since.